Hi, everybody. My name is Miles, and I'm with Peak Performers. I'm a disability inclusion partner here at Peak Performers. This is my job to educate and advocate on behalf of professionals with disabilities. I want to wish you all a happy Mental Health Awareness Month this May. And the challenge I would have for all of y'all is see if we can go beyond just awareness to action, because that's really where I feel like the rubber hits the road. I actually wanted to share something personal with you. I don't often take it, but yesterday I took a mental health day because personally I was just not quite feeling up for it. I was overwhelmed with a lot of the personal things that were going on, a lot of projects that were going on. And I told myself, Miles, you deserve to have the day off to look after your mental health. So that's just a small action that I can take to kind of be able to personally benefit myself. And since many people don't talk about mental health awareness, let alone taking mental health days, I wanted to share that and encourage you to think about your own mental health and how you're looking after it within the workplace as well as at home too. So we've got a great conversation with you today, and that's going to be talking about mental health and how it appears across the generations. Because, you know, as a millennial, I have a very particular perception about what it means to live and work with mental health, various different conditions, and knowing other people that have chronic quote unquote disorders, pardon the phrase there. As well as I know that many people, it just matters to have good mental health. But I'm also of a generation that has more accepted taking a mental health day, whereas this might not be something that is quite as widely accepted among other different generations that just have more of the mentality of get through it and just grind. So especially in today's day and age where we're seeing a rise of the quote 996, especially in startup culture here in Austin, I think it's time for us to look inward, think about our own mental health, and think about how we're creating a more welcoming mental health environment for all of our employees as well. And this not only makes sense from a good for all of us perspective, but it also helps from a business perspective too, with being able to reduce burnout and increase employee retention too. So having said all that, I would like to welcome Julie onto the stage. Julie, it's good to see you.
Great to see you, Miles, and thanks for your story. I'm a huge fan of the Mental Health Day. I'm glad to see you modeling that for everyone.
Absolutely. Well, welcome, Julie. And by the way, if you are joining us live, please take a second to introduce yourself. As an addition, what I'd like you to do is I'd like for you to drop into the comments, what does mental health mean for you? Please take a second if you feel comfortable to be vulnerable with the audience, and please also connect with all the other people that are joining us live. I feel like this is a great way to start off the conversation. But Julie, real quick, tell me a little bit more about who you are.
Sure. Hi. I'll tell you, I guess, the part of me that makes me a guest for you this morning. So I had a long career in advertising and marketing up until my 40s. So I was a working professional in entertainment marketing, moved to Austin, Texas, went back to graduate school and became an LPC. That means I'm broadly trained to treat mental health disorders as a generalist. But I went into that degree knowing that I wanted to come out a career counselor. That makes me a hybrid. There aren't a lot of us out there. So there are lots of LPCs who like the exploration of career questions, but they don't like the executional end. They'll stop at the resume kind of thing. And there are lots of excellent job coaches out there who will work on resume positioning and search, but they don't do the front end piece.
Hmm.
Um, as a hybrid, I will take a client all the way from broad brush, what do I want to do with my life? Why am I unhappy in my job? Whatever the large question is, all the way through to landing the job.
Hmm.
So I ride the whole ride. It's a hard thing to sum up. I kind of call myself a mental health informed career counselor. That's how I position myself.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. And I think I did an interview a while back with Mitha Vasquez, who is an HR leader in Austin. And she was sharing with me how she really carries career coaches for looking after her future. And she carries counselors for being able to manage her past. And I thought that was such an insightful moment for her to call out about the importance of being able to look at the full spectrum of life forward and backwards, as well as like within the career as well, because it's not always easy advocating for yourself from a mental health perspective, right, Julie?
No, 100%. And it's kind of interesting within the therapy community. Um, I don't know why. but mental health professionals generally don't like to touch the career space. It's sort of the third rail.
Mm.
We were all required to sit through a career counseling class in our master's program, but I think I was the only one who wanted to be there. When the teacher asked, like, "Who wants to be here?" I'm going, me, and nobody else wanted to. It's almost like they see a divide between individual personal mental health counseling and job stuff. To me, they're completely intertwined. It's a false distinction.
Well, real quick, let's talk about it because I'm a millennial, you're Gen X, but I imagine that, and right now we have Gen Z that's entering the workplace, but I imagine that when you were going through your earlier years, you were working with the silent generation and baby boomers who still exist largely in the workplace today. So I want to give the preface that we are talking in broad generalizations about literally millions of people. And so I think that it's also important to call out too that as we're talking about generational differences, we're not talking about the other very important impacting factor, and that's the intersectional nature of mental health, how I, as a white cisgender man, may interpret it versus someone who is Black and queer. So I think that those are important caveats that we put on. But having put the disclaimer in there, what would you say and how would you characterize all the different generations, starting as far back as the silent generation?
Well, I'd actually back up one step and make one broader distinction, and then I will answer your question. Um, I wanted to point out the difference between a life stage and a
Mm,
generation, because they're not quite the same thing, but they do
mm,
intermingle, right? So a life stage is, generally 20-year intervals, and they're developmental stages, and they're common. So early childhood, young adulthood, midlife. And there are lots of theories around the things that we're all supposed to experience at various turning points in our lives and what implications those might have for mental health.
mm,
Um, so, for instance, there's a social psychologist named Eric Erikson who was trained by Freud, and his idea was if Freud was all about the id, he was about the ego, and he was about what is happening contextually and socially at various stages in our lives that have an implication for what I'm experiencing from a mental health point of view.
mm,
So, think about what happens when you become a new parent. What happens when you get married? What's hard about those transitions in your life, and what kinds of psychological impacts those changes in your life might have.
mm,
So that's one distinction.
mm,
A generation is different in that you're really talking about a group of people who, in a 20-year interval, are going through the same things at the same time. So you've experienced the same slice of history. You all went through World War II together, or Vietnam, or COVID,
mm,
and how those broad experiences shared across a general generation of people in the same life stage at the same time, that's the
mm.
intersection, have a bearing on their attitudes toward everything, but then specifically mental health. So that's a long way around back to your question.
Yeah.
Um, so we think about right now basically six generations, starting with the silent generation. Those are
Mhm,
for most of us on this forum this morning, I'm assuming our grandparents and great grandparents. Um, Mental health was taboo. There weren't a
mm,
lot of resources for it, a lot of suppression, to use a Freudian word. It just wasn't something people talked about, highly stigmatized.
mm,
Baby boomers, probably your parents,
mhm.
grandparents,
Yep.
um, start to warm up a little bit. They're open to some conversation about mental health, but there's still like no modeling for this, right?
Mm,
Um, then the Gen Xers come around, that's me, and probably some others. Um, we are the self-reliant, pragmatic, latchkey kids who like to think we're pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps. We were
mm,
also coming into adulthood when Prozac hit the scene, and suddenly mental health treatment becomes something very mainstream.
mm.
Um, Again, we're coming out of generations that didn't model this for us, but we're starting to move toward the possibility that like self-care might actually matter, that maybe there are some resources for this, maybe it has a bearing. um, you can probably speak to millennials. You come next better than I can even, but it's another step in that direction, right? A little more openness.
Yeah, I think that there's many of us within the millennial generation will tell close friends that when we experience mental health challenges, and I think that many of us have a bit of a chip on our shoulder too for some of the challenges that we've had within the workplace too, and many of us have gotten frustrated as well when other bosses don't value our mental health in the same way that we value our mental health. But I think that there's still a lot of stigmas that exist out there. Like, we are very prone towards talking about anxiety and depression. But I think that there might be other taboo areas, such as talking about bipolar or, God forbid, schizophrenia, right? Or even substance abuse disorder. There still exist many stigmas within my generation.
Yeah, I think that sounds right. And I'm looking at a comment from a LinkedIn user who's another Gen Xer. Hello, Gen Xer, um, who commented that we were told to leave our emotion at the door when entering the workplace. And yeah, that was certainly true in my experience too. Um, and how we now show up as managers, right? Are we more open to the people that work for us who might be more open than we were trained to be? And I like to think that Gen X has opened up, that it's a different conversation between a Gen Xer and a millennial than it would be between a millennial and a boomer,
Yeah.
maybe. But right now, in anyone's workplace, depending on what industry you're in and how big your company is and whatnot, there could be four different generations working together. And so how those attitudes mix and mingle, what the intergenerational conversations are like, it's all pretty interesting. Um, but we've left two more on the table. So Gen Zers are those born between 1995 and 2009, and Gen Alpha 2010 and 2025. And I don't mean to lump them all together, but the commonalities are these are the total digital natives, right? They've grown up completely online. Um, the Gen Zers, I also have a ton of heart for. I'm seeing a lot of them in my practice right now who not only had a highly social media informed life, but also went through COVID at a key developmental stage, whether that was middle school, high school. Um, and I see some of those clients as people who kind of lost a developmental opportunity somewhere along the way, and it shows up. We're seeing higher rates of anxiety and PTSD in recent college grads right now, significantly higher. And I think it's very much born out of those two things. Um, we had coffee a couple weeks ago and talked a bit about this generation too. And like that, one thing that's really nice about them is that I think they're very open about mental health. There's tons of mental health conversation happening online. The downside is a tendency towards self-diagnosis. Um,
Mm.
without proper training, without
Mm.
professional counsel, just to kind of sell the practitioners of the world. Some of that's awesome, but you can also get it wrong.
Mm.
Um, and so really getting a clear diagnosis, understanding evidence informed treatment, what's actually going to work for you. I love the openness, but I worry sometimes that there's a little too much um, self-treatment going on.
And I think you bring up such an important discussion there, and something that has been raging online recently, particularly among the doctor community, if you will, and that is how much should we value lived experience versus doctor knows best kind of thing. And I think that right now we're seeing the pendulum swing towards lived experience, especially with so many people finding other people online who are like me and that express the kind of things and express the similar kinds of experiences to me. So I think that we really have to figure out how to kind of manage both of those because
Mhm.
that is a complex situation. And it is challenging, and especially like in my experience, like showing up as a person that's hearing impaired, it's a lot easier because I can show somebody my audiogram and it goes like this, right? Like it's very clear. And many people with disabilities that, as we often traditionally think of them, showing up in a wheelchair, showing up and not having an arm, for example, those are very observable kinds of things and ain't nobody going to debate you on it. But we get into a whole different kind of quagmire when it's something that is completely non-observable. And how am I to know what's going on and what's affecting you and what's in your head? So how do you begin to tackle that?
Yeah, that's tricky. And well, I'll answer your question in a second, but I'm going to layer onto that too and say I think the other thing that's tricky about any kind of mental health diagnosis is that we think of them as fairly black and white. I mean, one way to get therapists fighting fast is to start talking about the DSM, the giant guide we all use to diagnose people, because those checklists seem really black and white. You've got this or you don't got this, and you've
Yeah.
got this if you meet certain criteria. When actually, my lived experience as a therapist is that it's people's symptoms are like volume dials. They go up and down. Context and life events can really impact whether a symptom even goes on or off and how loud it is, right?
Mhm.
Um, And it's a pretty complex algorithm, kind of what the thing is, what the context is, what that person's personality is, race, gender, ethnicity, all the things. Like what's actually the complete picture of this person, and is the tail wagging the dog? Um,
Yeah.
and so to me, that's actually, back to answer your question, why I think good diagnosis matters.
Mm.
Um, Even if it's not static, right? Even if it's a picture of this person in time in this context, what's going on in this person's situation right now? What are the levers that we can pull? Um,
Mm.
to give you a really specific example, something I see fairly often in my practice, actually, um, anxiety often shows up as a symptom. It might be
Mm.
the first thing you see. Anxiety is observable, right? You can tell when someone's nervous, sometimes
Right.
hands shake, sometimes language stutters. They've got anxiety. Anxious people have a lot of tells. Um, but anxiety doesn't, that can be a symptom of an underlying other thing. It can be
Mm.
a medical condition. It can be undiagnosed ADHD. It can be a byproduct of depression.
Mm.
Um, if you're treating the symptom and not the cause, that person's not going to, you know, the treatment's not going to be effective. It's not going to be lasting. You want to make sure your ladder's on the right wall.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, and yes, you can sometimes observe patterns. And I think that what's challenging too is that I can observe patterns, but it's also important for me in the workplace not to rush to any kind of assumptions too. And I think where it gets challenging for me is that I share with people, even though it makes me uncomfortable, I think it's important to talk about it. I share with people that I had a traumatic life experience about a decade ago, and it's left a lasting impact on me. And I had to go to lots of therapy to kind of get good again. And I remember that there was two very different kinds of reactions within the workplace when I started telling people about that. On the one hand, I had my boss who was extremely supportive. He didn't always know exactly what the right thing was to say, but he would check in with me constantly. He would take me out to lunch. And for this reason, I will always remain loyal to him. I think that he's an incredible person that showed a lot of bravery and loyalty to me. On the other side of things, I remember when one coworker casually asked me while we were out on the sales floor, "Hey, how are you doing, Miles?" And I dove into kind of exactly what I was experiencing. And I remember that he muttered, "I'm sorry." And then he never made eye contact with me again. And the way I describe it is as almost as though I were contagious.
Mhm.
And I think, and to be fair, he was my generation, like he was my age. So that wasn't like the generational difference. But I think that it also speaks to the fact that sometimes we don't always know what to say. We don't always know how to react. And looking back, I want to try to give him the benefit of the doubt that maybe he didn't know what to say. He didn't know how to react. And so he defaulted to not doing anything, which made me feel a little bit uncomfortable.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, and it's, you and I work on sort of different ends of this problem. I mean,
Yeah.
you run a staffing agency and are really engaged in helping organizations understand how to work with people. I work individually on the client side,
Mhm.
right? And so when these conversations come up, I try to make sure that my clients are aware of their rights.
Yeah.
Um, and we understand that they're legally protected under ADA to have whatever conversations they need to have at whatever stage in the process they feel they need to have it. We know in the real world that's going to get mixed results depending
Yeah.
on where you're working, what the culture is, who your supervisor is. I hate that that's true, but it is. And so one thing I'm assessing for is how strongly does my client need accommodations?
Mm.
How important is it for them to be open in their workplace? How big a risk is that for them? Um, I would love everyone to advocate.
Yeah.
Don't, yeah,
Yeah.
don't get me wrong. I also don't think that's necessarily someone's individual burden,
Yeah.
right? Some people are more comfortable in that role than others. Um, I'm on the side of what's going to make them successful in the situation that they're in. Sometimes that's going to be openness. In some situations, that's actually probably not the right card to play, as much as it breaks my heart
Yeah.
that might be true. I don't know if you would give a different answer to that question from your
No,
end.
I think so. And in my case, like, I look back on that time of my own personal life, and I also realized that fortunately I didn't have any lingering effects from it. Like it was something that I managed to work my way through and get to the point where I was good again. And while I still have some lingering effects, I would not consider it a disorder, right? I wouldn't put it in the realm of like post-traumatic stress or anything like that. And I think that my heart goes out to people where this is kind of like a daily lived reality for them. Like this is something where, this is not just like I broke my arm. Like that's the way I describe it, right? Like you broke your arm. Everybody can relate to that. But it's one thing to break your arm, and it's one thing to have permanent paralysis of your arm, right? Or even limited functionality of your arm. I think that's probably a better analogy. So I think it's really important that we kind of make that distinction. But I also think that it's important as we're having conversations about mental health that we realize that this is normal. Like everybody's going to go through something probably. And if not, I want to drink your Kool-Aid. Like, I want.
Yes.
And can you share that with the rest of us here? Like, I think it's important to acknowledge that almost all of us are going to go through something or multiple things at some point in time. And it's important that we support mental health for all of us, including people where they can't just eventually move past it as well.
Yeah, 100%. And I think you'll make another really important distinction too, where, something episodic in someone's life, everybody understands grief.
Yeah.
Grief is somehow acceptable. It's some external event that you are responding to. That feels different to people than something like you called it out before, a bipolar diagnosis, something chronic, something you're going to carry your whole life. That's a little more uncomfortable to people. It's harder for people who've not experienced bipolar or known someone with bipolar to really understand. Turns out bipolar, in many cases, is actually a very manageable illness. But people may not know that. And so how do you have that conversation?
I think so. I think I would point out that there are multiple different levels of disclosure too. So there is, you can disclose without disclosing, so to say, right? Like you can tell people I'm going through a hard time of it. I am having, I'm not feeling great in my head right now. And so you can disclose to a certain level without necessarily naming your diagnosis. I think what the ADA, there is another layer of protection that's available once you do share a diagnosis with a trusted hiring manager, with your HR team. And that can help protect you in the future in case, for example, your medication needs completely change one day and you cannot get out of bed. It wasn't affecting you before, and then all of a sudden now we're in crisis mode right now. So there's different levels. And I think that more leaders can come forward if you have been successful with your condition, with your struggles, even if it's something that was only temporary. If you have the courage to come forward and share how you got through it, I think that speaks volumes to you as a person and helps empower so many people around you too.
Oh yeah, role modeling is really, really, really important, and especially in a workplace setting where you might be from a power position lower on the totem pole, right? To see someone who carries more power than you modeling something really opens up conversations and possibilities for people. But it's funny. I was also thinking about with my 20 somethings who are just starting out in their careers and might have something to manage, when I think about it from a generational framework and think about a Gen X level boss, one way that we also talk about it is, look, a Gen Xer, a boomer, just wants to know that it's not their problem, right? Seriously.
Like you're going to leave that at home, right?
Yeah, but I think what I mean by that is like rightfully persuading them, truthfully, that you can get the work done. Right? Like having a 1 hour therapy appointment you have to keep once a week is not necessarily something you have to openly disclose. They don't necessarily care where you are or what you're doing. If you're blocking your calendar every Monday at 1 o'clock, great. As long as the work is getting done. You know what I mean? And so I think there's also a helping people, even if they don't want to disclose, advocate for themselves by owning their needs. They don't have to fill in the blanks, but if they know what they need and they assert that and they build their schedule around what they need to make some time for, I think they'll find most supervisors don't really want the nitty gritty. They just want the work to get done.
And how does that make you feel? Like, how does that kind of distance from that, like, how does that make you feel?
In what way?
No, like, how does it, do you feel like people of my generation are oversharing to a certain extent?
No, I
Hmm.
don't. I mean, again, I think it's sort of on a spectrum, and I'm thinking about
Yeah,
it mostly in terms of what's best for my individual client.
yeah,
Um, so, what I'm always shooting for with my client is their ultimate sense of empowerment. We're going for success. So, unlike a long term mental health therapist, I'm really more behavioral in nature. We have a goal we're trying to hit, and I want this person to feel whole and put together and like they're going to succeed in their role. And
mm,
so, for some people who might be really open to sharing and advocating and being a role model in their workplace, awesome, do that.
yeah,
Um, for people who might not be comfortable, who just want to do their jobs,
mm,
it can be very anxiety inducing to feel like they're carrying a secret or they might have to explain themselves. And I try to remind them that they don't really have to do that. What they're accountable for is the job description. It's getting
yeah,
the job done. Their boss doesn't have to be their best friend. Their colleagues don't have to know everything about them. If there are things that they need to pull off to the side and deal with, you can negotiate that into your agreement
mm,
without necessarily having to tell your whole story if that's not what you are comfortable with or think the environment will support.
yeah,
Um, and I might sound like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth. As a mental health practitioner, I would love it if we all advocated for all of this.
yeah.
But I get why that might be really scary to a 25-year-old in her second job who isn't sure what's safe to tell anyone. Like it's baby steps for that person. And let's start with just making sure that they've created a situation for themselves in which they can be successful.
Mm. We had an interesting comment come up from Yolanda. By the way, hi Yolanda, and join me. Yolanda is going to be coming on with me to talk about governance in a couple of weeks. So please do tune in for that. But she says when environments are not designed, individuals are forced to compensate, and that compensation is often misread as personal resilience instead of evidence of a system that has not yet not met its duty. I think that that's a very salient kind of point right there. And I want to give a shout out to Renee, to Aaron, to Shankar. Many people have chimed in with different comments and sharing their own kind of personal experiences with this. So I can imagine that if you are a baby boomer right now, and you are looking at the youngest people within your workforce, you're going to say, I didn't have that support, so why should I offer that support to you? Um, and sometimes I feel like empathy can be a bit of a double-edged sword, right? Like, I understand where you're coming from, but I was able to overcome it and I'm successful with it. So, what would you speak to those people that are maybe in senior leadership positions right now that are looking at their youngest generations and how they can acknowledge the support they didn't have, but also offer support to their youngest coworkers?
It's really funny. I feel like every decade or two, there's a book out about the generational divide in values. I
Mm,
think there was one for Gen Xers, and there's one that came out like, I don't know, a few weeks ago. Someone at NYU Stern wrote a book about the current generation and the total values misalignment between the current, upcoming
mhm,
class of people and managers. I just think that's sort of funny. Um, you know, because again, I come at this from an individual client lens. That's why I'm going to think about it. So if that's my
mm,
client, what I'm going to encourage is understanding
mm,
and some compassion for that generation and how they're looking at things. And like you might not agree, it might not make you happy. You can judge it all you want, but if you need someone to be productive and work with you and collaborative, the best thing you can do is try to understand them. How do you bring out the best in the people that are working for you? Understand what motivates them.
mm.
Doesn't have to be the same thing that motivates you, but let's find some common ground.
Hmm. And on the other side of it, we currently have millennials that are going increasingly into hiring manager roles. They're increasingly in positions where they have the opportunity to change things and build the
Mhm.
workplace that they've always wanted to work in. What kinds of things should they be keeping in mind in order to support mental health?
I double back to just intergenerational dialogue,
Mm,
understanding what each level is experiencing and where the common grounds are. One thing I'd point out about boomers and even Xers right now that's sort of interesting. I serve all populations, so I also see people on that end of their careers, and I feel for boomers and Xers at this point who think. going back to Erickson and sort of where they would be on their developmental trajectory. Historically, we think of these folks as maybe last chapter heading to retirement. And in previous generations, there was sort of a glide path. They had developed all of their expertise. They didn't have to change much. They would just sort of run out the clock on what they knew how to do. Not now. I mean, look at the incredible level of disruption, technology, AI, it's hitting everybody. And there are people late stage in their careers in my practice who I have a lot of heart for when they basically tell me, I don't want to have to learn a whole new thing. I don't want to go through another tech revolution. Like I really thought I could just do my job for the next 10
Yeah.
years and be done. And I bring that up just because I think we think about mentoring as top down.
Mm.
Um, Mentoring can go bottom up. New hires have a lot to teach their managers about how to adjust and adapt in a rapidly evolving technological space. And to wouldn't it be lovely if we could take some of the anxiety off senior managers by partnering with them with people who knew what they were doing technologically a little bit better than they might? Like, what if we set up those kinds of collaborations? Like, we can help each other in every direction. It doesn't have to be so top down.
Yeah. Final question that I have for you is oftentimes when we talk about mental health, it goes from 0 to 60 or 0 to even 120, right?
Mhm.
Where the moment that we start talking about mental health, we start talking about self-harm and suicide. And
Mhm.
I think that that's important to call out the resources that are available for people that are thinking about these kinds of things. But I also think that it may make feel less, more reluctant to come forward and say, I'm having mental health struggles. It's not to that level, but I'm still in pain right now. So, how can we add a little bit more nuance to this conversation so that more people can feel comfortable coming forth and saying, I'm having a bad day?
Mm. In a workplace setting,
Yeah.
community wide. I
I
mean,
asked a
I
hard
love it if,
question, Julie, you know?
yeah, I mean, I love it if we all just asked each other those questions all the time, everywhere. Um, the best answer I can give you, and I guess if this came up in my practice, how to make those conversations safe,
Mm,
how to remind someone that they can talk to you,
mm,
um, even if you don't necessarily know what to do. I'm thinking about an entry level person going to a middle manager that they might trust, and that middle manager might not be well trained in this space, might not be an HR person, um, but to say you can tell me and I'll help you figure it out.
mm.
Let's find the resources. Let's see what we can do to support you. Um, that's what I'd love to see is people who are willing to accept and to help problem solve because we don't always know the immediate right answers.
Yeah, and that's okay. And it's, I think that going back to my own experience, I think that you might not always know what to say. Somebody may surprise you with something. I think it's important to acknowledge and say to that person, hey, Julie, thank you so much for telling me. I'm not quite sure how to respond. This takes a lot for me to process, but I appreciate that you shared that with me, and I'd like to talk with you about this further. I just need to remove myself for a second and kind of compose myself and stuff because I think sometimes that's something that if we're not trained and we don't deal with this kind of thing consistently, it can challenge us and it can be very difficult to know how to respond well to. But I think the biggest thing that I would challenge you to do is respond, make eye contact, treat them like a human, treat them the same way as you would before you knew that thing about them.
Mhm.
And yeah, just treat them like a human, treat them like you would anybody else kind of within the workplace. Julie, I want to thank you for coming on today to chat with me about this very important topic and about mental health. Real quick, are you working on anything right now that the audience should be aware of?
Uh, Not that I'm ready to talk about, but I can be found at goodtogoatx.com. I'm keeping my client base fairly small right now because I'm going to start working on an adjunctive project that I'm not going to go public with yet, but I'm trying to create space. I think, that's another thing I work with my clients on. It's like, your job is part of your life. It's not your whole life. And it's important to think about balance, um,
Hmm.
and where you want to put your time and creating the space you need to pursue adjunctive interests. So maybe that's something I'll be modeling. We'll see. Stay
And is
tuned.
there any resources that you would recommend for people, especially during Mental Health Awareness Month?
I was going to touch on just because you brought up suicide, that is something I'd love to just say a quick word about.
Sure, sure.
Um, there's a real misconception, I think, around suicide that if you suspect someone might be thinking about it, that you
Mhm.
make it worse by asking. Um,
Mm,
that's like, do you bump into that too? Like that's an old idea that hasn't died. Um, the best thing you can do is ask, actually, believe it or not, even if you're not really
really.
sure
Mhm.
what to do next. Often people will disclose, or by asking, you make it safe for them to disclose, and then you can decide what to do with that next. And even if you don't know, that's a great time to say, thank you for sharing. Um, Give me a minute. Let me help you find some resources. We know the suicide hotline gets a lot of action. There are lots of other resources out there, but to be a safe person, but especially on that topic, if you're ever in a situation where you think you have some suspicions, the best thing you can do is ask. As counterintuitive as that might sound.
No, that actually makes sense to me because I think a lot of people, they are reaching out for help, and this is them disclosing those kinds of thoughts of self-harm is them asking for help, even if it's not worded as such. And the best thing that we can do is be open-minded, receptive, listen, and not be scared of them because they told us something very personal too. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
Julie, it's been great talking with you. I feel like we could chat about this conversation all day long. I want to thank everybody that joined us live as well. I will be publishing a recap of Julie's conversation with me in a couple of weeks. But in the meantime, come join me next week at 11:30. I'm going to be talking with Lee Reinhardt, and we're going to be talking a little bit more about you've got a job, so now what? And particularly how you navigate a new office ecosystem, how you ask for accommodations, all those good things. You have a job, now what? Join me next week, Fridays at 11:30 for Disability Weekly. Thanks, y'all, and bye for now.